Okay. So in the last chapter, he says, I'll paste it in chat. He says this at the end on reason. Among the most important is the validation of scientific induction. On the polemical side, I've hardly touched on the dichotomy between rationalism and empiricism, the many false alternative it spreads, and so forth. And he said he would write more on it, but I can't, where he would write some stuff on it later or something like that in this chapter. Not in this book, but he said somewhere else he would.
Understanding objectivism has more about rationalism and empiricism.
Yeah.
Analytic versus synthetic truth is an essay in Ito about that.
Oh, okay, cool. So it's spread
Concepts
out.
versus percepts. I can't think of anything in particular. Deduction versus induction might be, I don't think he wrote anything about that, but maybe in one of his lectures, and definitely in some books he has endorsed by objectivists, like Logical Leap. That's one thing in particular that would reflect his views.
Okay.
Have you read those? Yeah, I've read that
the
book.
Logical?
Yeah, I have it. I read it. It was a long time ago. I don't quite remember it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but I didn't find it particularly radical or unique. It wasn't that helpful to me.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if it's got like 36 ratings. I don't know if I necessarily want to.
Yeah.
I like pickup stuff, but maybe another time I'll get into that.
But it's not, he didn't write it, so it would still have a different feel than his books, but he endorses it explicitly. So
yeah,
like he wrote the foreword or something.
Okay, cool. All right. So we can go into the chapter on the good. We may have answered some of them, so I'll just share screen and we'll work out which ones we've already done, because I don't know if I've marked them necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's see. So we've done that. Skip that.
The good.
Oh, we've spoken about this. This is back to the question of chronological versus logical order, so we can skip that. Let's see what I'm asking here. Yeah, actually, so yeah, I suppose parental love is like, as in, obviously there are certain extremes you can take where they might not love you anymore, but that would be like absurd extremes. So I guess I was picking up on a difference, but I guess there's still that. It's not like you can do anything at all and they'll still love you. So we can get rid of that one.
Yeah. Well, I don't even see where you got that from. Like even that you had to
parental love.
think of it.
Well, I just thought, like, because it says here, look, it says if one is guaranteed to have a certain thing or not have it no matter one's actions, then the thing is not an object one gains to keep. One acts to gain or keep. Like your children, your parents don't give you conditional love when you're a kid. That they just love you because you're a kid. You can throw spaghetti on the floor, you can scream, you can do whatever you want, and they'll still, you've almost got, if you want to call it love, it's a different form of love, which makes it different. But it's like they're not going to just
Yeah.
suddenly go, oh, well, I hate him now because he throws ketchup on the floor. There's the boundaries are different. There's probably still boundaries because I was just thinking about it now, but like it's not the same. Like, if you went over to a friend's house and started throwing spaghetti all over the floor, like friendship over pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that for parental love, it just goes maybe to more extremes. I mean, there are situations where you could imagine where a parent might stop loving you. But I mean, like maybe as a child, there's no reasonable time that they would stop loving you or caring for you. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, you can acknowledge that parents have a moral obligation to a child, but is that the same as love? It gets tricky there. But I think you're right. It really just depends on like what extreme you're talking about. It is
Yeah.
conditional to some degree, or it ought to be conditional to some degree.
Yep. Yeah. Although I do still think, I mean, I'm pretty sure there are, I don't know, I need to find examples, but I'm, I wouldn't be surprised if I could find some examples of like someone who murdered or did some very bad things and yet a parent still loved him.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, you might just argue then just that it's not moral to love them anymore. That morally speaking, maybe there is some limit you should have, and that's kind of the point here. That any value is conditional to in some way or another. It might not. It might rarely come up. It might almost never come up. But there are conditions to what makes it a value. I mean, namely
Yeah.
that it benefits your life in some way. It might be almost impossible for some things to find a reason to avoid it, or there's very few conditions, but they exist nonetheless.
Yeah. I, yeah. I mean, I guess the broader point that is being made, I think, I can't remember if they get into it later, but that you're not guaranteed anything, even love, because you could die. Even if someone was like, they would say they love you no matter what. Like you could get killed, they could get killed. So it's actually not true. It can't be true because we're all mortal, got limited time on the earth. Obviously, we can do offensive things to people. We can become a different person, and so yeah, it's never. There's always the possibility um, that you can lose the value. So it's not guaranteed. No value is guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, in that
Guaranteed would mean
sense,
there's like an omnipotent God telling you for eternity you will keep this and be here. So
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you could say there's no condition, not even existence itself is a condition. I mean, you could say, yeah, there's the condition to something being of value is that it serves some purpose to your life. It serves some enhancement of your life. And as long as it meets that condition, then it can be of value. And otherwise, it'd be like maybe it might be improper to hold things as a value. It would be improper to say, without condition, I will love you or something. Like that might not be appropriate because you don't want to say you have absolutely no conditions. You want to say that there are reasons you value something. There's a point behind it. You're not just doing it just because, or that literally nothing can change it. If you're rational about it, of course, you'll acknowledge there could be things that could harm your value, endanger your value, or there's some way that could make it disappear. Whether it no longer exists, whether it's a person taking away their value or taking away reciprocated value, or as you said, that if something dies, I mean, that's a condition, because you can't really value a thing anymore. You can't value that person, obviously, if they don't exist. There's nothing about them that exists. I mean, you need to preserve their existence in some way. You would acknowledge that they could die one day, so you want to preserve that as best you can, for example.
To play angel's advocate, what about your love of your child? Like you're saying everything should be conditional. What conditions would you put in place for love of your 2-year-old child?
I mean, assuming you're trying to be rational about all of it, it would be that you're, um, well, conditions one, they're being healthy. I mean, they need to be alive, of course. That's one, in one sense, there's condition. But then another sense of condition is that, like, is there a state, or can they reach a point where they are no longer a value, that they're actively a disvalue? I can't think of many instances where that would be the case. Well, I can think of maybe if, say, very severe cases of, like, there are rare cases where, like, children have like a impulse to murder and kill things, or even attack their younger siblings. Like, I heard this case where, like, it's very rare, but it's this like 5-year-old, like, she tried to kill her brother one time, and it wasn't like an accident, or she didn't realize she was trying to kill him. And like, that's almost psychopathic, and it's such a degree that it's almost an active threat to your life. I mean, that might be an extreme case, but
Got it.
I think
Okay,
on
so could,
average, yeah, on average, most kids, like, there's not much they can do, and probably nothing they can do to get their parent to no longer love them. And it would be perfectly rational, I think, because a parent acknowledges that you have to raise them, teach them things, help them realize what's right and wrong.
um, yeah, so I guess the one exception you'd make where you might not love the child is if they had an impulse to murder at 5 years of age. I just say the saying that they must be alive sounds kind of odd. Like it is, I agree that it's a condition. We discussed that, but maybe it's an
Yeah,
assumed context because it sounds kind of odd
yeah,
to say. Like if I say the condition that I love my 1-year-old is that he's still alive. I don't know. It kind of sounds like, well, if he manages to
yeah.
survive,
Yeah,
I'll
it
still
does
love him.
sound goofy, but I think it was worth making explicit to
Yeah.
acknowledge that, like, to value something, you must aid it in those ways that are even physical in nature. If you value something, you must acknowledge that it could go away. So if it can go away, you got to preserve it. I mean, that's really what it's acknowledging, that if you can lose something, you should take the actions to preserve it.
Or can it not be said that when someone passes away, you still love them, even though they're not alive? There's some meaning to that, even though I
Yeah,
know that the them is not there. There is some meaning to that. You know, like people will carry around things that remind them of the person, or they will remind themselves, or they will say they carry some part of their soul because they do certain things that that person did. And so it's it's also weird to say it is conditional in life. The fact there, but then it's strange because it's I get that you don't enjoy it, like you want them to be here to enjoy their relationship, but if they're gone, it also sounds strange to say you no longer value them. Do you know
I
what I'm saying?
guess the only distinction there, I think, is that it's acknowledged, maybe you could say, the concept of them is a particular value, or the idea, what they remind you of, has some value or importance, as opposed to them physically. I mean, them as the entity, the living thing, the person. I mean, clearly that's not the same as the concept. So, I mean, I think it's fair to distinguish between memories and from the actual person. And I think that's
Yeah,
fair.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's interesting. Okay. What about a child with rich parents? Like, on the one hand, you can say, well, it's not guaranteed because the child could die, but that sounds weird. Like, there is definitely something to the child has been given heaps of wealth and doesn't need to work for it. And so, if one is guaranteed to have a certain thing or not, no matter what, the thing is not an object one acts to gain or keep, and it's not a value. And there's one sense in which it's like, it isn't a value because the child didn't have to work for it. This is back to this distinction. But there's another sense in which it's not a value because, there's one sense in which it is a value because he's not guaranteed to have that wealth, like he could die, which sounds kind of weird, or something could happen and his parents could lose their wealth or whatever. But on the other hand, it's not because he's probably going to get it. And like, he didn't have to work for it. He was just guaranteed it no matter what he did. Do you know what I'm saying? There's two senses you can think about it.
Yeah, like maybe like if he had an inheritance, even like he would just be guaranteed that money regardless. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, an inheritance is what I'm thinking of, but I'm saying, like, it's weird to think that you can say on the one hand that it is a value because he's not guaranteed to even be alive, which is this kind of philosophical metaphysical perspective. But that doesn't, like, it doesn't really make sense because even though I that's what we're saying of course everything is a value because nothing is guaranteed because you can be alive or someone can die. But then on the other hand, when I go, well, it's not a value because you're not actually, you're guaranteed the inheritance. That makes sense too. Like, to ignore the fact that value is conditional in life and no life is guaranteed, like, makes more sense to me than to acknowledge and say, oh, life is not guaranteed, therefore the wealth that is coming to him is a value. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think so. I would say that, yeah, in that sense, you could say you're guaranteed to get this value when your parents die because of the inheritance, for example. Um, I mean, I think there's still conditions on like, do they still have the money? Or is it save the economy of the country even capable of sustaining that money? Is it coming from anywhere? Like, you have to recognize at some point that the value comes from somewhere. It doesn't come out of thin air. I mean, it comes maybe before your death. You still have to, I mean, the parents want to maintain your relationship or value you in such a way that they want to provide for you after they die. And, I mean, I don't think it's a direct, obvious way that the value is not guaranteed. I mean, in some ways, yeah, it's guaranteed that the law says they're guaranteed. That's one thing, but you still need to maintain everything else about that context, like an economy, like maybe think of like an Atlas Shrugged, like people demand like, oh, you should um, demand money or the government does something for you without acknowledging that these values, this money that supports you or that makes your life more sustainable, the origin of that value is, say, producers and thinkers and whoever else drives the world. I mean, it might not be obvious that it might seem guaranteed that like if you write a law, you'll get the money and that's that. I mean, there is some, at some level, if you trace it back, the value isn't coming out of thin air. There's conditions and reasons why these values can be distributed. There's a reason why there's even money to want. There's a reason that there is enough money that you could even think of like distributing it.
But so you're talking about broader
Yeah.
causes for there being money available and conditions.
Yes.
But from the perspective of the child, what action does he take in relation to it? to like, okay, an object is outside the field of value if action in relation to it is inapplicable or necessarily
Okay.
ineffectual. Action to getting his inheritance is inapplicable, but the only action I can think of is maintaining his life. But that just seems off. Like something about that doesn't sound right to me. Like to say, well, life is conditional, and so the child is trying to maintain life. Therefore, he is pursuing a value of his inheritance. There's something totally off about that, because I do understand
Yeah.
that life is conditional. So there is, so it's not like you can't do anything. But then on the other hand, like there is definitely a difference between receiving an inheritance and like in terms of your valuing and receiving an inheritance and say working for one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm like, what it about this is, I don't know how to capture this in words. So
I mean, like in some sense, yeah, you could be saying that it's being guaranteed at some level. I mean, we can't say that it's guaranteed absolutely in the sense that no matter what happens in the
yes.
world, you'll always get it. I mean, we agree on that, or
Yeah.
you acknowledge that, but I think in a way that's just reflects maybe you shouldn't be so a person giving an inheritance shouldn't be so at ease about it. You shouldn't just go like, oh, you're my son, here's the inheritance, that's that. I mean, that's almost like unconditional thinking. Like you're not even saying that the person should earn it or should represent something honorable, like Francisco and Atlas Shrugged. Like he said, he can only inherit something to the extent that he demonstrated his virtue and all that. And I think that might be more appropriate into a when you want to be a value positive outlook on life and you want to focus on virtue and doing your best and things like that. It might not be appropriate to just say, like, oh, here, have this. I have no conditions on it. I mean, that would almost be like, it would not be appropriate because you don't. I think the idea here is also that we should live our lives in a way that we shouldn't just guarantee things to people, that we should reward people for, well, they're good if that is the case, or something to that effect, that you don't just give things just because, that there should be conditions that like life isn't guaranteed in any particular way other than promises people give you. I mean, promises are one thing, but you want to live life in a way that's focused on choice and all things like that. And I think it goes more to a moral issue of how you should treat others, not just are your values guaranteed, but we should live life in a way that we reward and acknowledge the necessity or the requirements of these values.
Yeah. Although that gets into justice, which we
It
will
does.
definitely get to.
It does get into that, yes.
Let's move on, because that's I think this is a there's something here, but that is still not clear to me, and I don't want to get stuck in it too long.
Yeah, I
But
think got
yeah,
into a
sorry,
good enough point now. I think we're at a
sorry.
good point with yeah, I think we're at a good point with that now. So yeah, we should move on.
Um, I think we discussed this. Is my friend Max a value, or is it his friendship that is a value? And you said something like his friendship is a value, and or his friend. I value him. I forget. It was like I value the attribute or something. How did you say it? Just
Well,
trying to work out.
you can
Yeah.
value Max as the person, as the entity, as the actual thing, and we could just distinguish that from the concept or an attribute of Max, like an aspect of Max is his friendship with you, or like that's a relationship between you and Max, but it's not necessarily Max himself. Like, because say Max has all these characteristics about him and his relationship to you, and things about him that have nothing to do with his relationship with you, perhaps. Like you might like his honesty, for example, which isn't really an aspect of the friendship, it's an aspect of him. and you can
I would
value
say
it.
that's an aspect of that has to be those things like every attribute has to be in a sense an aspect of the friendship, doesn't it?
I wouldn't agree. I mean, his own honesty isn't like dependent on a relation with you. I mean, it can produce a relationship in the sense that you like his honesty, and that's worthwhile. And it's worthwhile to have an honest person as a friendship.
Yeah.
But his own honesty is not the friendship itself, or it's not part of the friendship. Like whether or not you were friends, you would still have honesty.
Oh, you're just saying that those attributes are not dependent on the friendship, not that the friendship is not dependent on those attributes, right?
Right.
Okay. So
That's right.
then, so I'm still confused. So it's I value the friendship and therefore I value him, or I value him and therefore I have I don't, they're both a value, right? But then,
Well, there's valuing him, and friendship is only one of the things you value about him, is kind of what I'm saying.
oh, okay. All right. And
There's
then,
more to him and his nature than just the friendship he holds with you. Like maybe you just admire his virtuous way of acting. I mean, that's not what he does with somebody else, or how he treats other people isn't really part of your friendship, but it might be something you admire, or the type of job he does doing, I don't know. Like he's a doctor and he's a surgeon and he does life-saving surgery, and it's not any part of your friendship, but you value that about him as a person. Like that's part of him as an individual that you can value. That's not necessarily the friendship.
no, it's not the friendship, but it's just confusing when you say it's not part of the friendship, because usually when you value someone as a friend, part of what draws you to them as a friend includes things that are not the friendship. Like if someone, like you said, is a life-saving surgeon and has a lot of interesting things to say about that, that might be part of what draws you into the friendship. So the way you put it, it's not part of the friendship is confusing when you mean the friendship is not, what you mean is those attributes are not dependent on the friendship. But it's okay. I think I follow you.
Yeah.
Is gym a value? So like, is going to gym a value, or is a strong body a value? The reason I'm asking this is I'm trying to clarify in my head, like the going to the gym is the means, and then strong body is the purpose or the end value. So like,
Yeah.
is there a distinction to be made there? Like, are both a value?
Um, going to the gym
Yeah,
as
because
a
this is
value.
like, I think of going to the gym as like almost like the virtue, and then the strong body as the value, the thing you want to attain. And so,
That's how I think of it.
but then
That
could you say going to gym is a value?
um, I usually just prefer to have values as nouns. I don't think it really makes sense when it's a verb. It's like you're not valuing, like going to the gym isn't a thing. Maybe it's a thought, but it seems more like a method, strictly a method. And but I guess there is overlap because you can value methods for what they allow, but
Confusing,
this,
right? It's confusing. Oh, that's what I was like trying to clarify.
yeah,
I
I
agree,
mean,
it's a thing you do, but then,
it's a lot of overlap. I mean, like you had the value and the way to attain the values.
okay.
I mean, you
But
could say
then,
there's that all virtues are also values, but that seems a bit too obtuse.
but then, if we say all virtues are values, that would mean that,
Yeah.
what would that say about the objectivist ethics? Because we've got the three cardinal values and then we've got all those virtues. We're then saying actually the virtues are also values. So like,
Yeah,
is
I
for
don't like the
example,
sound of.
well,
Yeah,
that's
go
what
ahead.
we're saying. That would be the implication.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as, yeah, virtue is action, value is the thing. It just seems more precise to talk about. Like you have your means to your values and your values. I mean, I guess you could describe it as valuable, but I wouldn't, I don't usually describe it as a value. It's not the thing you're seeking. I mean, you are seeking an actual thing. You want the tangible entity or the tangible result on or change to an entity. You're not the going to the gym is not even itself what you're after. It's not a goal. And I would think if it's not a goal, then it's hard to think of it as a value. Like, I mean, you don't seek what you seek in life is values. You don't want to seek just merely an abstract thing. I mean, values should be something that serve your life concretely. It's not just a thought, but they really serve something. And I think that's part of it. That like that the material things that you acquire or the well, that wouldn't be quite accurate either because if cardinal value is say self-esteem, and that's an attribute, it's not a thing either, and that would almost seem like a virtue also. Like if you have self-esteem, it implies a certain way of acting and being.
To get there, maybe a certain way of acting and being to get there. Meaning, I always interpreted. We'll get into this later because I've read through some of the virtues and values section, but I always interpreted self-esteem as something you earn over time, and it's more like a subconscious response to yourself based on, accumulated actions.
Yeah, but sometimes virtues sound like that too. Like pride seems to be like that sometimes too.
Right.
And I don't think there's a fine distinction other than to say that all virtues are methods, but not all values are virtues. I mean, it's hard to come up with a precise definition here. I don't
Then,
feel there's a clear line between virtue and value.
so if I value Max for his friendship, then I would save his life not because I value him, but because he's the method, he's the means to the end. I would only save his life because I value the friendship, because the friendship is the value and Max is the means. Max being alive is the method. It sounds kind
I
of
would
weird.
say, I would almost say like friendship is the method and max is the value.
But something about this is odd.
Yeah, I've always had trouble with it. Now that I think more about it, it's hard to find the line other than to
Yeah.
say that
Okay.
virtues are methods. And there's plenty of virtues. All the virtues are methods, and or like going to the gym is a method. And I guess we could say methods are valuable, but clearly there's a distinction between the entity that you actually acquire or the entity you preserve or whatever else.
Is the object of unrequited love of value if he or she is not being pursued? An object, because here we go. Uh, is inapplicable or necessary, ineffectual. So it's unrequited love. So therefore, action is inapplicable or ineffectual. Um, if one is guaranteed to have a certain thing or not have it, no matter what one's action, then the thing is not an object one acts to gain or keep, therefore not a value. According to that definition, this might not be a value. And it's goal-directed, the fact of goal-directed action. Something.
In a descriptive sense, it would be a value. This might be one of those cases. Well, this is a case of the two definition thing. Usually it applies to very few concepts, but this is one of them. Where, yeah, in some
What's
sense,
that?
it like descriptive versus normative. Like in a descriptive sense, yeah, unrequited love is a value. Like the unrequited love is a value in terms of being an unrequited love. But really wouldn't be any rational sense of valuing, I think, because you're not, it's not a thing you can seek, it's a thing you know you can't have almost. It's a thing you know that there are no conditions, or you don't meet the conditions, but you want it anyway. Which it's not, it's true though, yeah. In some sense you're valuing. You seek it and you want it and it's desirable, but then in a normative sense it ought not to be a value because you don't meet the requirements of that value. It's like flying in the face of it. Like if you want something, just demanding it or wishing it won't make it so, and pursuing something merely on the wish would it hardly be rational. Like you want to acknowledge that there's certain requirements you must meet for something. Like if you want to climb a mountain, well, you've got to be strong enough. You can't just say, well, I'm not strong enough, but I wish it, and I'll take no effort to better myself. I mean, maybe you could say that you seek a different relationship with somebody and you better yourself, and maybe in that sense that'd be rational. But it was just unrequited and you want it to be so merely just to make it so, that wouldn't be rational, or even it wouldn't meet it wouldn't be like a normative sense of value because you can't even meet it or acquire it.
Need to think about that one. But it also sounds odd to go, like, let's say someone falls in love with someone else and the other person isn't interested in them. It would be weird to say, oh, well, if you continue feeling love for them, you're irrational because on the basis that, you know what I'm saying? There's something, again, like, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not clear on these that much. Yeah, I guess there's also different angles you can take, like your love, the basis for your love for the person, even though it's not returned. And then there's the actual person. I don't know. This is like, this requires probably actual specific concrete examples to get into because it's hard when it's too in the abstract.
Yeah, I think we should move on to the next thing from there, I think.
Yeah, we can. This is actually, I don't know if you know, Craig Biddle wrote an article about, this is what inspired some of my questions. He wrote, I don't know if you've read this, so I don't, but he says a couple of things which are bolded. So the article is purpose, values, hierarchy, and happiness. And he makes this distinction between desires and values. He says, mere desires are not the same things as values. Values are not just things we dream about or long for. Rather, they are things we act to gain or keep. What do you think of that distinction? Because does that mean that if I dream of something for 2 years and then I start acting on it after 2 years, in the whole 2 years I dreamed of it, it wasn't a value? It was.
Yeah, I would argue that it's not properly a value. It was not value in the normative sense. I don't think, if you don't pursue something, I don't even think it should be called a value, or maybe you could say you're acting in a valueless or incompetent way. And I think you could argue that maybe. I mean, depends which way you want to argue it, but either way, it's not in any sense a proper value because you're failing to do anything to acquire that value or to rationally acknowledge that if something is a value, you should seek it. If you choose not to
Pursue that
seek
desire,
it,
you mean?
yeah, I mean, if it is a value and you've evaluated it in a way that you said, yeah, it'll further my life, then yeah, you should pursue it. And if you don't, it's like evading the value of it or avoiding it, or
So it is
in
a
other
value,
ways,
but it's just evaded.
I would argue it's more that you're evading what could be a value. Like,
It's,
what I'm trying to acknowledge here is that unless you act for it, it shouldn't be a value in any normative sense. is not a value in a normative way.
Okay, I'm playing angel's advocate here, but how can you dream of something for 2 years if you don't? It just sounds weird in my mind, but maybe unless you make that distinction, then you can say, okay, fine. If you're like, some things are desires where you're motivated to want them, but properly using a philosophical definition, you don't value it until you take some action. That you can, but you can have desires that you think of for 2 years. Is that sort of, we're trying to create that pathway,
Yeah,
like Moses
that's
parting the
the
sea or whatever, to separate these two things.
yeah,
Is
that's
that
the
what?
distinction I'm trying to make here. Wait, I know it's hard with the particular words to use, but it's not in any philosophical, clear normative sense. What do you call that a value? I mean, you have to act for it, you have to want it, you have to act towards it.
Okay, here he says, our existing value hierarchy consists of whatever recently have been and currently are acting to gain or keep. This may or may not be the value hierarchy we want. It may not be consistent with our genuinely self-interested needs and desires. All right, so I guess he's separating that you can be in conflict almost. You can want certain things, but be valuing, because it's weird to say you value something that you hate. It just sounds, there's something, but maybe it's capturing that we can act that way.
Yeah, that contradiction can exist. I think that's part of what he's saying. That, or maybe you might not realize that you shouldn't like it. I mean, there's that too.
If you've been working at 50 hours a week at a job you love, then you've been valuing the job that much. If you've been working 50 hours at a job you loathe, you've been valuing that job that much. What does he mean? Do you have any take on why did he, in the original article, he did emphasize that?
I think to the extent you're doing a job you hate, the extent that you're doing it is saying it's a value, which would almost be against your life or contradictory.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you could maybe say that you value it a little bit because you need a paycheck to pay for your food. I mean, just to that extent, you value it, you could say.
So I could value, well, I guess there's valuing, and then there's what are proper values. Like, because then in this case, I could value drugs or I could value things that kill me, right?
Yeah, you could. And that would be improper, but yeah,
Okay.
it would be anti-life, but it would follow a descriptive sense of value or valuing of desiring. Like it fits
So,
enough in everyday use.
okay. So there is a distinction. I can value something highly yet hate it. That's weird.
I mean, it's at least with the job that you hate, like you could hate a lot of things about it, but there is a little value you have. I mean, you could hate your boss, but you could value the I don't know, convenient hours, or you could value the paycheck that you need. I mean, you're not gonna say you're gonna work overtime happily. You might not ever want to work overtime at that job, but at least to some extent, it's a value. I mean, if you don't value in any way whatsoever, it's just going against your life. You shouldn't go anymore. You should quit. It's harming you.
This brings me to this point. When I was reading Oprah in this section, I was reading more because I was trying to get clear on it. And then, well, I said, hang on a second, like he's saying there's a distinction here. If you don't act towards gaining something, it's not a value. But in Oprah, Peikoff says you can separate action and value and then not act in accordance with one's values. And then he says something about accepting a set of values yet betraying them in action. So it doesn't seem like Peikoff is making this distinction, because he's like, you can have value something like the business that you don't take action towards, but then betray it in action. Otherwise, if this is true, then you never betray any values in action, because you're not, if they're values, it means you're acting to gain them. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like these two things are conflicting in what's being said in this article and what's being said in OPA.
I
Because
mean,
you know what I'm saying? Like, how can this be if value is only things you act towards? Do you see the same contradiction here?
accepted values, you portray them in action. But yeah, I do see what you mean, that if you betray them in action, would they even be a set of values anyway? Is that how you think of it?
Yeah, because why would he need to make that distinction if values are always things you have to gain or keep? So I wonder if maybe I should just email the author of this article.
Were they ever values in? Wait, it seems like Peikoff is kind of answering that. What would it mean to accept set values and betray them? Well, they wouldn't ever be values.
Well, to accept a set of values, according to this article, is to pursue them, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the idea? Otherwise, they're just desires. They're not value. And so you can never betray values. Because once you stop pursuing it, it's no longer a value.
I mean, I would see, like, if you accept a set of values, I don't know. If you accept, I don't know, rational self-interest, or say a set of values might be like, trying to think of a concrete example of like a set of values, to betray them in action. I mean, you could say to somebody like, I care about you a lot, and then behind their back do something, well, I don't know, like cheat on somebody in a relationship. I mean, that's would be a more clear-cut case of betraying an action. And then you would have to acknowledge at some point,
Right.
where one of the things, maybe it wasn't, that person really wasn't ever a value anyway. That in truth, they aren't properly a value. That it seems to be saying that Peikoff seems to be saying that, yeah, it would be impossible, that there is some internal contradiction here, that you couldn't really call it a value.
No, Peikoff was saying the opposite, that we can betray them in action. So the example you gave is a good one. You can accept. So you obviously let's say you've got a partner, and then you cheat on her. That would be betrayal of value in action. But I'm not sure. This is.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some ways to answer this better. I think I'll have to show you some other article or something else, I think, to really get down at this. I mean, I think you're understanding fine, at least the distinction of needing to be consistent with your values and not betray them, and holding a value as, like, yeah, you're pursuing it. But I think there's some finer distinctions. I have to find some articles, I think, that might help you to go narrow down to resolve the issue.
Let's see what I'm. This looks like an intense question here. Let's see what I was. Maybe I'll move this down so it's okay. Corollary aspects of a single condition. Yeah, I didn't get what's a corollary aspect of a single condition. What is that?
Well, they imply each other, for one, but how do they do it in this case?
What's the single condition?
I mean, to value, yeah, you're assuming that there is a valuer, but what does
Okay.
still? I mean, that much is obvious. That, and an alternative, well, there has to be multiple things to select from. I mean, toward an object. Do you even need an alternative? I mean, I don't see why you even need alternatives. And of an alternative. I guess the alternative being either act towards it or you don't.
No, I think our alternative is meant, because I remember this was in the context of life and death, and that being the fundamental alternative. I think the context was, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember exactly, but I think the context was that it's not really ever guaranteed. You might not get it, right? It's not like, I want it, it's in your hand immediately.
Toward an object. Yeah. Why are they corollaries? Let's see.
Well, corollary aspect, sorry, I don't know how to butchering that. Corollary aspects of a single condition. What is the condition, and why are they corollary aspects of that condition? I didn't follow this very much.
Well, say it's a single condition is to say they're the same thing, or they imply the same thing. In the same way that like identity is or causality is a corollary of identity. I mean, to have an identity is to say there's causality. It's the same thing.
All I remember discussing corollaries with you before, and I'm a little bit clearer, but all I remember is we said basically it's an elaboration.
Yes.
But that that, as far as the content in my mind, that's what I've got.
I'm having a hard time figuring out what Peacock means exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that one's a bit confusing.
I don't know why I asked for this rationality and speaking a language, corollary aspects of a single condition. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't think it's an important question. The way you're phrasing it, I don't.
Well, I was just probably trying to clarify something here, but I don't really get what I was trying to ask. Okay. Yeah, I don't understand. I didn't understand this. It sounds like, do you get what I'm saying here? So he says we can look up. They are entities capable of self-generated living organisms because they are the conditional entities which face the alternative of life and death. And I'm like, well, I just don't see why it must follow that because an entity is conditional, it must be capable of self-generated goal-directed action. We simply observe the two simultaneously in animals, but it's not like it is conditional, therefore any conditional being must be self-generated, goal-directed. There's something there that confuses me.
Go up to the quote again. I should have it actually.
Because they are the conditional entities.
They're an entity.
I would have thought that it makes more sense just to say they are entities capable, they are conditional entities capable of self-generate, not because it's not because dependent on it's not suddenly that they've been given the capacity for self-directed goal-generated action just because they're conditional. I'm confused and like.
Yeah, I don't know why you would write it that way. I mean, yeah, like the logic of it seems pretty straightforward what you're saying. And I mean, that would be consistent even within objectivism, what you're saying that, yeah, you can't say they're being conditional as why they do self-generated action. I mean, you could make an argument through evolution, but obviously he's not making that an argument. Right. He's not trying to argue why did this happen in biology. He's saying, I mean, they are self-generated and they are conditional. I mean, there seems like two separate ideas.
Mhm.
And they imply, well, you need values because your life is not conditional and it's self-generated. So it implies you need volitional action and you need the actions towards what your life is dependent on. Combine them together, you need values.
Yep.
I mean, that seems to be what even Rand argues in Objectivist Ethics. So it's a weird way Peikoff wrote this. I don't think it's consistent with Rand, or at least his wording isn't clear.
Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't just me.